Very good afternoon to you. About 4 minutes past 3 p.m. is African time. It is the 9th of May, and here are the latest news from across the continent of Africa. We start from Senegal. A court on Monday handed opposition figure Osman Sonko a 6-month suspended sentence in an appeal of a defamation case that could jeopardize his run for the presidency next year. Sonko, who is 48 years old, came third in the 2019 presidential election and intends to stand again in 2024. But 2 court cases could drain his candidacy. He received a 2-month suspended sentence and a hefty fine in March for defaming Tourism Minister Mame Mbaye Niang, and a Dakar appeals court increased the term to 6 months on Monday, potentially making Sonko ineligible for the vote. Boubacar Cisse, a lawyer for the minister, told reporters the sentence would rule Sonko out of 2024 presidential vote if confirmed following a 6-day period for appeals. Now, a spokesperson for Sonko's party, Osnu Lee, and supporters on social media also say the ruling would scupper his bid if upheld, but the politician's lawyers left the court without responding to questions. The court also demanded Sonko to pay 200 million CFA francs, that is just about $330,000 in damages to Niang. Sonko failed to turn up to Monday's proceedings after warning he would no longer respond to court summons without guarantees for his safety. And when the appeal opened, he was nowhere to be seen, an AFP reporter at the courthouse said. The prosecutor general Ibrahima Bakoum had called on the court to have Sonko arrested and jailed. And the latest from Sudan, at least 481 civilians have been killed since the fighting began last month in Sudan, and more than 2,500 wounded. The figure given by the Sudanese Doctors Union is part of the wider death toll of at least 700 people killed since April 15th. Observers note that even as more than 100,000 people have fled Sudan, so far it is civilians trapped by the fighting who continue to suffer, with many queuing for what little bread is available. Those who've made it out are still in need of care, and the Sudanese border with Chad, hundreds of refugees are also queuing. A relief cargo slated for Sudan had been loaded onto an airplane in Dubai. It is a start, but the UN says the humanitarian situation in and around Sudan is tragic. It is feared there will be no progress when the peace talks, while both sides consider themselves capable of winning the battle. And I guess some good news from Zimbabwe. The Australian oil company Invictus Energy announced on Monday the discovery of hydrocarbon deposited north of Zimbabwe, a country which suffers from massive energy cuts. Analysis of the samples confirmed the presence of petroleum, helium, and high-quality natural gas. The company said the Australian company has reassessed the data from a study carried out in the 1990s by the American oil giant ExxonMobil, that is ExxonMobil, which had abandoned its projects on this site located 240 kilometers north of the capital, Harare. Invictus Energy signed an agreement in 2018 with Zimbabwe that provides for production sharing with the government as the country suffers massive power cuts of up to 19 hours a day. We go to Cote d'Ivoire, and the ex-rebel leader and former Ivorian Prime Minister Guillaume Soro, who has been in exile since 2019, said on his YouTube channel that there was no reason why he would not run for presidency in 2025. Guillaume Soro urged the leaders of his party, Generations and People Solidarity, GPS, to work on the ground to consolidate their organization capable of taking up the presidential challenge. Mr. Soro repeated that according to him, neither prison nor exile is a break on a career on his political destiny. Already in exile, Guillaume Soro has been sentenced in Cote d'Ivoire in June 2021 to life imprisonment for undermining state security, accused of having fomented a civil and military insurgency aimed at overthrowing the regime of current President Alassane Ouattara in 2019. Now, the dissolution of his movement had also been requested by the court. Leaders of the rebellion that controlled the northern half of Cote d'Ivoire in 2000s, Guillaume Soro had military helped Alassane Ouattara to come to power. during the post-election crisis of 2010-2011 against the outgoing President Laurent Gbagbo, who refused to admit defeat. Guillaume Soro had become the first head of government of Mr. Ouattara before a breakaway early in 2019, due, according to observers, to the presidential ambitions of Mr. Soro. In April 2020, he had already been sentenced to 20 years in prison for having misappropriated public funds. This conviction had justified the invalidation of his candidacy for the October 2020 presidential election. And the latest from Sudan, little information continues to be released publicly on the progress of the Saudi-US mediated talks in Jeddah between the Sudan Armed Forces SAF and the Rapid Support Forces RSF that began on the 6th of May. But as SAF leader general, that is the official Sudan Army, General Fatah Abdul Rahman Mande told Egyptians Al Kahira News TV that there is no use in sitting at the negotiating table in Saudi Arabia without genuine ceasefire. General Burhan said he welcomed all initiatives that aim to stop bloodshed, but stressed that RSF must give up its weapons. A Saudi diplomat had earlier told AFP news agency that the discussions have yielded no major progress. Numerous ceasefires have been violated since the conflict erupted on the 15th of April. And from Nigeria, gunmen have attacked a church in northeastern Nigeria's Kaduna State, kidnapping at least 25 members of the congregation. According to an official from the Christian Association of Nigeria, the gunmen burst into the Bege Baptist Church in Chikun, initially abducting 40 people, but 15 managed to escape. A police spokesperson confirmed there has been an attack but gave no details. Over the last 2 years, there has been frequent mass kidnappings by criminal gangs that are not thought to be linked to the Islamist militants active in the parts of northern Nigeria. Kidnappers often demand ransom before releasing the hostages. And in the DRC, the remains of at least 20 people were found buried in massive grave in an area used to cultivate Kakor in Doma village in Congo's North Kivu province over the weekend, according to local authorities and military spokesperson. A team of forensic and security officers exhumed the bodies after residents of villages in Beni territory found bones and clothing and alerted officials. Until earlier this year, the area had been under the control of the Allied Democratic Forces, or ADF, a rebel militia with links to the Islamic State group. The area is now controlled by the Congolese army. Moyisa Kambale Sindani, a representative of the nearby Kilia village, said over the weekend that the remains were reburied with dignity and security. He confirmed that the bones of at least 20 people were found, but that it wasn't possible to search further because of a lack of security in the region. It was not immediately clear how long the bodies have been there. Eastern Congo has been plagued with violence for decades as more than 120 armed groups fight for power, influence and resources, and some to protect their communities. The ADF attacks have concentrated on North Kivu province, but the group has recently extended its operations into the neighboring Ituri province and to areas near the regional capital Goma and South Kivu. The rebels have accused the UN and rights groups of targeting, maiming, raping and abducting civilians, including children. Captain Anthony Mwalushai, the regional spokesperson for the Congolese army, said the area had been an ADF stronghold. And from Burundi, former powerful Prime Minister Alain Guillaume Bunyoni appeared in court on Monday, accused of undermining national security and insulting the president, a judicial source and witnesses said. Bunyoni was Prime Minister from mid-2020 to September 2022, but was fired in high-level political purge after President Evariste Ndayishimiye took office. A former police chief and Minister of Internal Security, he was replaced by the then Interior Minister Gervais Ndiakobuka days after Ndayishimiye had warned of a coup plot against him. He was arrested last month in the city of Bujumbura on the eve of his 51st birthday. Thursday. Monday's session held before Council Chamber extended his pre-trial detention at Ngozi, present in the north of the country. A judicial source who asked for anonymity to discuss the case told the AFP News. The former premier was charged on Friday before a 3-judge High Court. In a closed session, the source said, Bunyoni is accused of undermining the internal security of the state, undermining the proper functioning of the national economy, and illegal enrichment, according to a court document seen by the AFP. He's also facing charges of illegal possession of weapons and insulting the president. A close ally of former President Pierre Nkurunziza, Bunyoni was a senior figure in the ruling CNDD-FDD party. He was seen as the head of a cabal of military leaders known as the generals who wielded the true political power in Burundi. The president himself had alluded to his isolation in a 2021 speech. Ndayishimiye took power in June 2020 after Nkurunziza died of what the Burundian authorities said was a heart failure. Amid widespread speculation he succumbed to COVID-19. He has been hailed by the international community for slowly ending years of Burundi's isolation under Nkurunziza's chaotic and bloody rule. And we end from Sudan. Just a quick update. At least 16 people have been killed in clashes between ethnic Hausa and Nuba groups. Sudan's Suna News Agency reported on Tuesday, prompting the governor to declare a curfew in White Nile State, which borders South Sudan. The state, which stretches from Khartoum to southern border, has so far been spared the recent war between the two rival generals who have been in charge of the country since the 2019 coup and also the 2021 coup that removed the prime minister. I've forgotten his name, but that is the latest news from across the continent of Africa. About 16 minutes past 3 p.m. here in Nairobi, East African time. A very good morning to you in case you're just waking up, and good evening if you were in Australia and the people in the Far East. Thank you so much for finding time, and really, you know, this story of Sudan, of course, it is a developing story, so I think we do have a duty and a responsibility to keep updating you as matters as it progresses. A lot of developing issues around it, and I think it's interesting what the government now, the army leader, who essentially is the leader of Sudan right now anyway, General Al-Burhan, and what he said about the peace process that is ongoing in Saudi Arabia. I don't know why he's not talking about the peace process that is supposed to be ongoing, that is hosted by IGAD. So as much as there's really little information that is coming out from this progress from the mediation that is supposed to be going on in Saudi Arabia, really nothing much has come out. In fact, the diplomat who spoke over the weekend over condition of anonymity said that not much progress has been made, and that can be seen as, I could agree with that, because if at all there will be any progress made, I'm sure they would have announced. So I think Saudi Arabia and the US, which are responsible for these talks, maybe don't have any news to talk to us about in lines with the progress that probably has been made in these talks. So I'm assuming there's really nothing much to write home about. Okay, but it is the sentiments of the army leader, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, what he said yesterday. And he was speaking to Egypt's Al Kahira News TV, very close to Al Jazeera, but Al Kahira, this is a news television channel from Egypt. And in that discussion, he said there is no use in sitting at the negotiating table in Saudi Arabia without a genuine ceasefire. Now, General, do you not have a representative in Saudi Arabia, or we are sitting here and waiting for hot air? And we are, our hope, from what we understand and from what we know, is that you have a representative in Jeddah, At least that is what we've been told with the organizers of that mediation process. And you've also, in the past, shown some interest in wanting to participate in a mediation process led by IGAD. So up until right now, that is the position and that is the impression that the army had given. But now you're turning around and saying there is no use in sitting at the negotiating table in Saudi Arabia without a genuine ceasefire. So are you telling us you do not have a representative in Jeddah? Is that what you're saying? Because if you don't find a use in sitting, so I'm assuming you don't have a representative in those talks. Then who is Saudi Arabia and the US negotiating between? If this is how you feel, I'm assuming then you don't have an envoy there representing your position as the Sudanese army. Yeah, from the office, somebody that you've sent there to represent your position and your interest and your issues. You can't say this and still want us to believe that you have a credible person sent in Jeddah, in Saudi Arabia, to represent the army in these talks, because what you're saying here now, I think, makes us understand the attitude that the army has been exhibiting since the start of this war. The ceasefire that has refused to hold, and I think one of the things that you were demanding here, General Buran said he welcomed all initiatives that aim to stop bloodshed, but stressed that RSF must give up the weapons. So that is one of the key demands that the army is making. So now we are beginning to understand why maybe even these talks, the mediation process by IGAD has not yet started, because that could be one of the preconditions. The army is saying before we sit down and have a conversation with the RSF, then would need for them to give up the weapons. I don't know why you'd want the RSF to give up the weapons right now. The RSF has been in that country since 2003. They started as the Janjaweed in 2013. They morphed into RSF. They've been having weapons. You have empowered them. The system in Sudan has strengthened them. The system from outside Sudan and other actors have strengthened their position in the security apparatus of the country. So asking them to give up the arms, this is not a TPLF Ethiopia's government situation. This is different. The dynamics in these talks, if at all you're trying to use some of the pointers and what happened in the Ethiopian TPLF talk that made the TPLF return to the government those heavy weapons, and they agreed to return. This is different. This is a different scenario. This is a paramilitary that you have nurtured, you have enabled. You were there when Omar al-Bashir was doing all this. And after Omar al-Bashir left, you continued, from 2019. So the systems in Sudan and other actors have strengthened the position of this group in the security apparatus and the leadership in general of Sudan. So asking them to give up their weapons, when one of their conditions is, one of the reasons even that got you into this mess that you are right now, is the one to be included and absorbed into the national army of Sudan. I don't know if this is a good starter that will allow for the other side to agree to come to the mediation table. But now we can see, perhaps we can peep through from this conversation that General Al-Buran had. We can probably see where the problem is and how he feels and how the army in general feels, because even that proposition of having them integrated into the army is something that the army was not warming towards. Al-Buran was not keen on having that happen, and I think I expressed my feelings about that. I didn't think it was a good idea to absorb them into the army, and that is because this is a paramilitary group. These are people who have been used to cause harm, to maim, to kill. They've been used as mercenaries for hire. I've mentioned the countries that they have operated upon. they've been used on, in Syria, in Yemen, and in other countries. So they don't have your typical traditional military mindset. So having them join the army with this kind of ideology, already this was going to pose a serious security instability in Sudan. So from the get-go, this proposition is something that I wasn't very much open to, and so was the army of Sudan. They didn't think it was a good idea. But how are you going to address over 100,000 paramilitary men, I guess, and if there are women in there, I don't know. What were you going to do with them? Because these are people who are used to be part of the leadership. They're being used by the leadership of Sudan from the days of Omar al-Bashir, and then when the army took over. You allowed them to thrive. You allowed them to operate. You equipped them. You took care of them. You paid them. Okay? And now all of a sudden, what you're asking is for them to dump their weapons and then do what? When you're telling them to put down their weapons, are you offering them an alternative? Are you saying we are going to train you in the way that we train the army of Sudan and make sure you go through a training that will enable you have that mindset that we have here in the army? You can't just tell them to drop the arms. This is a problem that you created. And this should be a very good learning lesson for other countries across Africa that have taken on militias. The DRC is doing that. Somalia is doing that. Some vigilante groups, some militia groups, and you're using them to address the issue of security. Before you know it, they become their own institution. They become an institution and part of you. So getting rid of them becomes a problem. So you can't just demand to get rid of this RSF, and I'm not speaking for them, but I'm just saying, for you to come to this mediation table, General Al-Burhan, and I do agree with your position that perhaps the RSF might not be a good fit for the military. Like it will be difficult, especially right now with what has happened. And so the allegiance will not be for the country and for the, and for the people of Sudan. Could be different. So that already poses, I don't know if that is even possible now to happen. But you can't just tell them to give up their weapons. You must offer an alternative. You must say, now, if you give up your weapons, this is what now the alternative, this is the solution that we're offering for that. We either take you through training, sieve through some of you and see who can qualify to go through the training and join the army, or see how to work through it. But you can't just demand for them to drop their weapons and then you don't offer an alternative and a solution for that. Because this is an entity that the country created and you all benefited from them. So you can't just drop them like that and now imagine that you will have a stable Sudan. Let me tell you, all these actors out here who have been using them, they'll still find ways of permeating, through them and still cause an insecurity in the future. So this is something that has to be addressed, and you must come up, you and the rest of the stakeholders, and of course the leadership of this RSF Hemedi, you must come up with solutions that will solve this problem once and for all, for you to have a stable Sudan moving on into the future. Of course, you've not even agreed to sit down and talk. And now that Al-Burhan is telling us, speaking his mind over this matter, we sort of kind of know, because these talks have been hush-hush. Nobody's telling us what is happening in Jeddah, except that nothing much has been made, no progress has been made. But now, if this is the position, I'm assuming this is the position of the army, then we do have a problem, and this problem has to be addressed. And so he's saying he's welcoming all the initiatives, one that is led by IGAD, the other one by Saudi Arabia, the other one by Egypt. I was telling you about it earlier on. And he's saying he welcomes all initiatives aimed to stop bloodshed, but stressed that the RSF must give up its weapons. I don't know if that is a conditionality that can be met right now, or you're just issuing out conditionalities that will be very difficult for the other side to respect and for everybody to come to the table. I think you must be reasonable at this point, because that is not something that Hemedi is willing to do. Right now, having engaged with the National Army in an all-out war, a lot is at stake, and so that, will be a difficult thing to do. Maybe a drawback, maybe a return in some of these sophisticated weapons, but then again, for the future, will you still need this entity to continue operating as an alternative military for the country? I don't think so. So you must find a way to either take them through training, absorb them in the army, or just find a way. But this is not something that you're going to wish away and hope that after them handing back the weapons, now they'll just scatter and go back to, I don't know, doing what. That is not possible. That is the reality. So you must be a realist in this situation, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. I don't know who is advising you on these matters, but taking such positions already, you will create a stalemate and we will not see the way forward. So, okay, but at least we know now why. Maybe. I'm just supposing, because they're not telling us what is happening, but I'm just assuming if these are the conditions and the preconditions they go with in this mediation tables, really, then it's no wonder we're not making any progress. It's no wonder IGAD is unable to move forward. It's no wonder the talks in Jeddah are not bearing any fruits. It's no wonder the talks in Cairo, led by Egypt and the Arab League, is not really bearing much, because that is a condition that will only make things not move forward. So I don't know if there's a compromise here that can be reached, but the issue of RSF must be addressed for posterity, and it has to be figured out. And just them dropping out the weapons and I don't know going where, that is not going to work. So you might need to relook at that. So anyway, that is what I wanted to talk about this afternoon. And so far, over 480 civilians have been killed in Sudan. So this is just part of the over 700 people who have been killed. I guess the rest of them are soldiers from both sides. And over 100,000 people have fled Sudan so far. So those are the current figures. And the United Nations is saying it needs about $445 million to fund vital support. That is just to enable those displaced by the fighting. $445 million. Do you know how much money that is? If that could be pumped into Sudan's education system, if that could be pumped into Sudan's infrastructure, do you know how much that money could do if it was not being diverted to solve this conflict, to address the problems that have arose from this conflict? Do you know how much money that is and how much change it could bring? So wars are very costly. The price tag of war is really, really costly. So that is how much the UN now is appealing to have, so that it's able to address the issues of those who have been displaced and to enable them survive for the next few days. So that is that. The issue of Cote d'Ivoire, we'll talk about that tomorrow, God willing. I'd like to stop our conversation here this afternoon, and I want to thank you so much for your time. It's about 32 minutes past 3 p.m. here in Nairobi. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.